Right now, a man is sitting in a Las Vegas courtroom facing life in prison just for some silly interviews. 100 years ago, prosecutors actually needed some evidence or a confession to lock you up, but not anymore. Now, anything you say, even if you're trying to create an internet persona, can be used against you in court. Some of the dudes in this video deserve it, some don't, but I somehow feel they'll keep their tongue behind their teeth for the rest of their lives. We're going through 10 cases where a rapper's own words became the weapon that sent them away. From Bay Area in 1992, all the way to a federal courtroom in Los Angeles that is open right now. Let's get into it. Mac Dre. Before the Bay Area had hyphy, it had Mac Dre. Before the Ghost Rides and the Stunna Shades and the Thiz Face, there was Andre Hicks coming out of Vallejo in the late 80s with a sound and a style that nobody had seen from that part of California before. He was funny, he was fluid, and he was magnetic in a way that made people want to be around him. By the early 90s, he had a following. He also had a song called Punk Police that would follow him somewhere he didn't expect. In 1992, when Mac Dre and two friends were arrested and charged with conspiracy to commit bank robbery, prosecutors didn't just bring the police report, they brought the music. Specifically, they brought Punk Police, an anti-law enforcement track that Dre had recorded and released. The song was creative expression by any reasonable reading, built on the kind of confrontational energy that defined Bay Area rap at the time. The lyrics even included a line where Dre acknowledged that he was a dope rhyme dealer, not a money stealer. All this didn't matter. In court, the lyrics were presented as evidence of his intent, his attitude toward authority, and his character. The jury heard the words, and the words worked against him. He was sentenced to 5 years in federal prison. He served them. When he came out, he kept rapping and eventually built the legacy that made him a Bay Area icon. He was killed in a drive-by shooting in Woodland, California in 2004, before he could see just how much the culture he helped shape would grow. But the part of the story that gets left out whenever his name comes up is that a rap song he wrote and recorded as art, as performance, as a persona was used to help convict him. That was 1992. It wouldn't be the last time. The practice prosecutors had discovered was that juries responded to rap lyrics differently than they responded to almost any other kind of evidence. A lyric sheet read aloud in a courtroom lands differently than a financial record or a police report. It sounds like a confession even when it isn't. And over the next 30 years, that discovery would be used against hundreds of rappers across the country. Some of them deserved it, some of them didn't. All of them made the same mistake. They said what they said, and then they couldn't take it back. Mac Phipps. McKinley Phipps was 22 years old and signed to No Limit Records when he performed at a club in Slidell, Louisiana in February of 2000. A 19-year-old named Baron Victor Jr. was shot and killed at the show. Witnesses were confused, accounts conflicted, and the physical evidence was thin. What prosecutors had instead was a song. The track was called Murder, Murder, Kill, Kill. It was fiction, or at least it was supposed to be. Graphic, violent, built on the kind of exaggerated street imagery that No Limit Records had made into a brand. But prosecutors brought it into the courtroom and played it for the jury, and the jury heard a young black man rapping about killing people and then connected that to the dead body in front of them. There was no direct evidence linking Phipps to the shooting. No gun, no clear eyewitness account that put him as the shooter beyond reasonable doubt. What there was a song with his name on it that made him sound like exactly the kind of person who would do something like that. He was convicted of manslaughter and sentenced to 30 years. He spent over 2 decades inside before his case gained renewed attention from advocates arguing that the lyrical evidence had poisoned the jury against him. Governor John Bell Edwards eventually commuted his sentence in 2021, and Phipps was released. By then, he had served 20 years. 20 years for a crime that the evidence, without the song, might not have been enough to prove. The prosecution's expert argued the lyrics showed a violent mindset. What they actually showed was what happened when a jury heard a black rapper singing about killing people and decided that the persona and the person were the same thing. Nobody had bothered to ask whether Johnny Cash actually shot a man in Reno. Snoop Dogg. By 1993, Snoop Dogg was one of the most famous people in America. Doggy Style had sold millions. What's My Name and Gin and Juice were everywhere. He had a look, a voice, and a presence that translated instantly, whether you were from Compton or Connecticut. He was also facing a murder charge. In August of 1993, Snoop's bodyguard McKinley Lee shot and killed a man named Philip Waldemariam near a park in Los Angeles. The case went to trial in 1996, and prosecutors wanted to use Snoop's song Murder Was the Case as evidence against him. The song is a gothic, cinematic piece about a man who makes a deal with the devil after surviving a shooting. It's not, by any straightforward reading, a confession confession to anything, but prosecutors framed it as a window into Snoop's mindset, his comfort with violence, the world he was describing because it was the world he was living in. The judge allowed portions of the lyrics in, the defense fought it, and what followed was one of the first high-profile courtroom debates about whether a rapper's art should be treated as autobiography. Snoop and Lee were both acquitted in 1996 after a self-defense argument that the jury ultimately believed, so the lyrics didn't convict him, but the fact that they were admitted at all set a precedent that California courts would use for decades afterward. A major murder trial had decided that rap lyrics, when they touched on violence, were fair game. The door was open, and every prosecutor in the country knew it. What protected Snoop in that moment was that he was famous enough to afford lawyers who knew exactly how to fight back. Most rappers who followed him into that same courtroom dynamic weren't. Lil Boosie. In 2009, Baton Rouge rapper Lil Boosie was already in custody on drug charges when prosecutors came at him with something much more serious. They charged him with first-degree murder, alleging that he had hired a man named Michael Marlowe Mike Louding to carry out killings on his behalf. The evidence they wanted to use included two of his songs, 187 and Body Bag. The verse in 187 that prosecutors zeroed in on included the line, "Any whoever tried to play me, they dead now." But it was Body Bag that made the argument genuinely frightening. A forensics expert hired by the prosecution analyzed the recording's metadata and testified that portions of Body Bag had been recorded within minutes of the murder of one of the alleged victims. Another verse they claimed was laid down less than an hour before a killing. The prosecution's argument was that the music wasn't art, it was a timeline, a running commentary on real events, recorded close enough to those events that the timestamps themselves told a story. Boosie was too comfortable, they argued, too used to putting everything he did into a song. Boosie's defense countered that it was exactly what it looked like: rap music, violent, exaggerated, built on a persona that had nothing to do with literal truth. His attorney argued that the jury was being asked to convict a man based on the feeling the lyrics created rather than facts they could verify. The jury deliberated for less than 10 minutes, not guilty on the murder charge. He walked on the most serious count, though he remained incarcerated on separate drug and gun charges. But the case established something important. The line between what rap lyrics could prove and what they could just make a jury feel was thinner than anyone was comfortable admitting. Boosie got lucky. The men who came after him wouldn't all be so fortunate. Bobby Shmurda. The summer of 2014 ran on Bobby Shmurda. Hot was inescapable. The Shmoney dance became a cultural moment that crossed every demographic boundary. Epic Records signed him after watching a music video. He was 20 years old, he was from Brooklyn, and he was everywhere. He also had a line in his biggest song that would eventually help put his friend away. Mitch caught a body about a week ago. Mitch was Deshane Crockett, a member of the GS9 crew that Bobby ran with. When federal prosecutors built a RICO case against GS9 in December of 2014, charging the group with conspiracy to commit murder, drug trafficking, and weapons possession, they brought the lyrics into court. Bobby's own line about Mitch catching a body was used as evidence in the case against Crockett. Bobby's broader catalog was used to establish what prosecutors called the gang's culture of violence, their comfort with it, and their willingness to put it on record. Bobby Shmurda was arrested in December of 2014, right as he was preparing to release his debut album. He had told a New York Magazine reporter in October of that year, "My music is straight facts. There are a lot of gangsters in my hood." In a courtroom, a 20-year-old telling a journalist that his violent music is autobiographical isn't artistic bravado. It's a statement against interest. Prosecutors made sure the jury heard that interview too. He pleaded guilty in 2016 to conspiracy to possess weapons and drug possession. He was sentenced to 7 years. He served 6.5 before being released in February of 2021. The debut album never came out. The label deal he'd spent his whole life working toward dissolved while he was inside. And somewhere in the middle of it all, the most important line he ever rapped wasn't something he said about himself. It was something he said about Mitch, and Mitch went to prison for it. Mayhem Mal. In 2012, Pittsburgh rapper Jamal Knox, who performed under the name Mayhem Mal, was pulled over in a traffic stop. Officers found 15 stamp bags of heroin in his car, a large amount of cash, and a loaded stolen firearm. He was charged with drug and weapons offenses. The two officers who made the arrest, Officer Costco and Detective Zeltner, were scheduled to testify against him at trial. While the charges were pending, Knox and his collaborator Rashid Beasley went into the studio and recorded a song. They called it The Police. That part was familiar enough. NWA had made a song with the same title in 1988, and nobody had arrested Ice Cube for it. But Knox's version was different in one specific, consequential way. He named the officers. This first verse is for Officer Zeltner and all you Fed Force, he rapped, and Mr. Costco can suck my for knocking my riches. The song went further, describing in explicit terms where and how Knox intended to harm the men scheduled to testify against him. "I'ma jam this rusty knife all in his guts and chop his feet," went one line. "You'll shift over at 3 and I'm gonna up where you sleep," went another. The song was posted to YouTube by a third party and linked to a public Facebook page. The officers saw it. One testified that it was a significant reason he eventually left the police force and relocated his family. Knox was convicted of terroristic threats and witness intimidation. He was sentenced to 2 to 6 years in prison. The Pennsylvania Supreme Court upheld the conviction on appeal, with the Chief Justice writing that Knox's song was of a different nature and quality from other anti-police rap because it named specific individuals who were about to testify against him and described in geographic detail how and where he planned to get them. Chance the Rapper, Meek Mill, 21 Savage, Killer Mike, and others filed a brief to the U.S. Supreme Court asking them to hear the appeal, arguing that the Pennsylvania courts were deeply unaware of popular music generally and rap music specifically. The Supreme Court declined to take the case. Knox's attorney told the sentencing judge that his client had no intention of harming the officers and felt pressure to maintain his rapper image. Knox himself accepted responsibility, but the image he'd worked to build, the persona he'd leaned into hard enough to write threatening lyrics about men with the power to put him away, had become the thing that extended his time in custody well beyond what the drug charges alone would have required. There's a version of this where Knox makes a song that's just as angry, just as raw, that doesn't include a home address and a shift schedule. That version of the song doesn't send him back to prison. He recorded this one instead. Young Thug. The indictment against Jeffrey Williams, known professionally as Young Thug, was 88 pages long. It named 28 defendants. It spanned over a decade of alleged activity, and it leaned on his lyrics, his music videos, and his social media posts in a way that no major rap case had ever done before, at least not at that scale. Young Thug was arrested in May of 2022 on charges that included racketeering, conspiracy, and street gang activity. Prosecutors argued that Young Stoner Life, his record label, was also a criminal street gang called YSL, affiliated with the National Bloods. The indictment cited lyrics across multiple songs as evidence. One of the most discussed lines was, "I never killed anybody, but I got something to do with that body." In court, prosecutors wanted the jury to hear that as something more than a rap lyric. They wanted it treated as an admission. The trial became the longest criminal trial in Georgia history. It ran for over 2 years. 17 separate sets of lyrics were allowed into evidence by the court. Not 1 or 2 lines. 17 instances where what Young Thug had written was handed to the jury and framed as a window into who he was and what he'd done. His defense argued throughout that treating rap as autobiography was a form of racial bias, that no other genre of music was held to this standard, that no court would bring in a country song about murder as evidence that the artist killed someone. The court disagreed. The lyrics stayed in. One by one, co-defendants began taking plea deals. Gunna pleaded guilty in December of 2022 and was released. Eventually, in October of 2024, Young Thug himself entered a guilty plea and walked free. But 14 other defendants in the same case did not. And the 2 years he spent inside, the longest criminal trial in Georgia history, the legal bills, the career interruption, and the precedent set for every rapper who came after him, none of that disappeared with the plea. What the YSL trial established more than anything else was that prosecutors now had a blueprint and they were willing to use it. Tay-K. Tay-K was 16 years old when he participated in a home invasion in Mansfield, Texas, in July of 2016 that left 21-year-old Ethan Walker dead. He was arrested on a capital murder charge, posted bond, cut off his ankle monitor, and ran. While he was a fugitive, wanted for connection to a murder, he went into a studio and recorded a song called The Race. The music video was shot while he was still on the run. The lyrics included the line, "Shoot a f***ing boy in his face," and the hook was built around the image of a man running from the police. The song was recorded, released, and started racking up millions of streams before law enforcement caught up with him in New Jersey in 2017. By the time Tay-K went to trial in 2019, The Race had become one of the most streamed rap songs of the year, and prosecutors made sure the jury knew that. Printouts of the lyrics were entered into evidence. The music video was played in court. The defense's position was that the song was artistic expression, that the running metaphor evoked his situation, but didn't constitute a confession. The prosecution's position was that a teenager who was actively fleeing a murder charge made a song bragging about that exact situation, called it a hit record, and collected streaming royalties while law enforcement searched for him. Tay-K was convicted of murder. He was 19 years old at sentencing. He received 55 years. He'll be in his 70s before he's eligible for release, if the sentence holds. The irony is almost too painful to look at directly. The Race became his most commercially successful moment precisely because it was so vivid, so specific, so clearly rooted in something real. The same authenticity that made made it hit was what prosecutors used to argue it wasn't fiction at all. In a Texas courtroom, a chronicle of your own crime is not protected speech. It's evidence. Tay-K was making money off that song while law enforcement was hunting him. The streaming royalties accrued. The song climbed charts. And every play, every share, every moment the song spread wider was also another moment prosecutors could point to and say he knew exactly what he was doing and he put it on record. Lil Durk. In October of 2024, federal agents arrested Lil Durk at a Miami airport. He had been booked on separate one-way flights to Dubai and Switzerland that same day. The agents were already watching. Prosecutors alleged that in 2022, Durk funded and directed 5 members of his Only the Family crew to travel to Los Angeles and attempt to kill rapper Quando Rondo in retaliation for the 2020 death of King Von. The attempt missed Rondo and killed his cousin, Lil Pab, instead. The federal indictment cited his lyrics. Prosecutors argued that lines from his music were not metaphor but instruction, not performance but documentation of a criminal organization's activities and culture. His defense pushed back hard on every lyric introduced as evidence, arguing that treating rap as a literal account of events was exactly the kind of prejudice that had been distorting jury verdicts for decades. The arguments were partially denied. Material stayed in the record. Durk has been held without bail since his arrest. His attorneys offered at one point to fund a round-the-clock private security detail estimated at $700,000 just to get him home while the case moved forward. The judge denied the request twice, ruling that no combination of conditions could adequately address the risk. By the time his trial began on August 20th, 2026, he had been inside for nearly 2 years. The Grammy-nominated music that had made him one of Chicago drill's defining voices was still playing on radio stations while he sat in a federal detention center in Los Angeles. What made the Durk situation carry particular weight is that he'd watched the system work before. He'd seen the YSL trial unfold in real time. He knew exactly what prosecutors did with lyrics. He still tried to get on a plane to Italy when agents were already at the airport, and the music he'd made while building one of the biggest careers in drill was sitting in a federal evidence folder. Keefe D. This one doesn't involve a song at all. It involves a book, a documentary, a police interview, and a man who spent years telling anyone who would listen what he did the night Tupac Shakur was killed, apparently under the belief that the statute of limitations on consequence had run out. Dwayne Davis, known on the streets as Keefe D, was a shot caller for the Southside Compton Crips in the 1990s. On the night of September 7, 1996, Tupac Shakur was shot near the Las Vegas Strip after a Mike Tyson fight. He died 6 days later. For almost 30 years, the murder remained officially unsolved. During those 30 years, Keefe D talked. He gave a police interview in 2008 where he described being in the car the night Tupac was shot, an interview he believed was protected by a proffer agreement with federal investigators. He appeared in a BET documentary series in 2018 and described, on camera, being present during the shooting and knowing exactly what had happened.
Basically, you sell drugs to be successful to get up out that shit. Yeah. And to get out the gang and all that, you know, so you can provide for your family.
And then in 2019, he published a memoir. The book was called Compton Street Legend, Notorious Keefe D's street-level accounts of Tupac and Biggie murders, death row origins, Suge Knight, Puffy Combs, and crooked cops. The intro described him as one of the only living eyewitnesses to Tupac's killing. He wrote in detail about getting a gun, getting into a white Cadillac, and looking for Tupac. No words exchanged, he wrote of the moments before the shooting. The time for talking had passed. The shit was about to go down. A Las Vegas detective assigned to cold cases stumbled across the memoir around 2020 and began building an arrest around it. Davis was taken into custody in September of 2023. His defense immediately tried to have the book excluded from evidence, arguing it was entertainment, exaggeration, a co-written project that he hadn't even fully reviewed. At his sentencing, he claimed he'd never actually read it. The judge didn't buy any of it. In a ruling at a June 2026 hearing, she noted that Davis had encouraged people to buy it to get the real truth. The chief deputy district attorney summarized the situation plainly in court. Had he decided to never write the book, he would not probably have ever been prosecuted for the crime. The trial opened on August 17, 2026, nearly 30 years after the murder. The prosecution's opening statement called it an act of revenge. The defense called the memoir exaggerated and the decades-old investigation fundamentally flawed. Keefe D, now 63 years old, sat at the defense table and pleaded not guilty to a crime he had spent years describing in public, in vivid detail, apparently convinced that time had protected him from the consequences of honesty. If convicted, he faces life in prison. The prosecutor's words bear repeating one more time because there's never been a cleaner summary of what this entire video has been about. Had he decided to never write the book, he would not probably have ever been prosecuted for the crime. But he did write it. There's a legal principle underneath all of these cases, and it's not really about rap music at all. It's about the difference between saying something and meaning it, between performance and confession, between a persona and a person. Every other genre of music in America has been granted the assumption that those things are separate, that the singer is not the song, that the storyteller is not the story. Rap has not been granted that assumption. One study counted nearly 700 cases over a 30-year period where hip-hop lyrics were entered into evidence in a criminal trial. Country music has never had a case like that. Heavy metal hasn't. Johnny Cash sang about shooting a man in Reno to watch him die, and he died with a Presidential Medal of Freedom. What the cases in this video have in common isn't just that words were used against the people who wrote them. It's that in each situation, the person talking believed they were safe doing it. Mac Dre thought a song was a song. Bobby Shmurda thought authentic was a selling point. Tay-K thought his audience was the only people listening. And Keefe D thought 30 years was enough distance between a confession and a consequence. None of them were right. And if you enjoyed this one, you'll definitely want to check out these videos on your screen next. Have a good one.